Welcome, everybody. I think it's about a minute to 4, but we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Karen Creech. I work with the Patrick Heath Public Library and the Boerne Book and Arts Festival, and I would like to thank you for joining us on this final program for the weekend. We've had 6 really wonderful panels, and you're in for a treat with this one, especially if you love mysteries. I would like to introduce our panelists for our Mystery and Mayhem in Texas panel. And let me pull up my bios here. And I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. Ben Rehder's love of the outdoors has influenced much of his writing, including his Blanco County comic mysteries revolving around a Texas game warden and a colorful cast of rural characters. Novels from that series have made Best of the Year lists in Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Kirkus Reviews, and Field and Stream. Buck Fever, the first in the series, was nominated for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel from the Mystery Writers of America. Gone the Next, the first novel in Ben Rehder's Roy Ballard Mystery Series, was a finalist for the Seamus Award. Ben Rehder lives with his wife near Austin, where he was born and raised, and his latest novel, Free Ride, is in the Blanco County series. Terry Shames grew up in Texas and went to the University of Texas. After graduating from UT, she joined the CIA, where she trained at Langley, Virginia, as a computer programmer and analyst. Terry Shames is now a successful mystery author of the Samuel Craddock Mystery Series. The first book in this series, A Killing at Cotton Hill, received the McCavity Award for Best Mystery of 2013. It was nominated for the Strand Critics Award and a Left Coast Crime Award for Best Mystery. The latest book in this series, her 7th, is A Risky Undertaking for Loretta Singletary. The author resides in Berkeley, where she is president of Northern California Sisters in Crime and on the board of Northern California Mystery Writers of America. And then Reavis Wortham is the author of the Red River series and also the Sunny Hawk Texas Ranger series. Both of these are set in Texas. Reavis Wortham was born in Paris, Texas, and now resides in Prosper. The Rock Hole in the Red River series was a finalist in the prestigious Benjamin Franklin Award presented by the Independent Book Publishers Association and a finalist for the Will Rogers Medallion. He's a member of Mystery Writers of America, the Writers League of Texas, International Association of Crime Writers, Sisters in Crime, the Texas Outdoors Writers Association, and International Thriller Writers. The latest book by the author is Hawk's Fury in the Sunny Hawk series. So before I go around and have everybody kind of introduce themselves and talk about their series, I wanted to mention about the book sales. If you decide to order any of the books by the authors, you can do so on our website, and I will put our website up on the chat. We just have the featured books on there, but I will try to get you any book that you want. If you don't see a favorite book by your favorite author, just email me and I'll put the email address on there too, and I will do my best to get that book for you. I like to get books into people's hands. So just let us know if you don't see your favorite book by your favorite mystery author. So I guess we'll just go in alphabetical order. And Ben, could you tell us a little bit about your 2 series?
Sure. Of course, since we can't see or hear all the people, I brought along this little tool. So every time I say something funny, so there you go. And a hand for Karen. Yay. Oh, it died. Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I have 2 main series going on. I alternate between the 2 of them. One is the Blanco County Mysteries with John Marlin, the game warden, and a couple of guys that are well, what some people might call rednecks, or what some of you might call cousin, named Red and Billy Dawn, and they somehow wound up in everything that goes on in Blanco County. They get involved as well. So you got Marlin, you got his best friend, you got the rednecks, and you got just kind of a revolving cast. And then I bring new people in, but they have kind of a humorous slant to them, kind of inspired many years ago by Hyacinth and Elmore Leonard and Lawrence Shames and a lot of those folks. So I really enjoyed what they did. So I started off with Buck Fever was the first one in the Blanco series, and have just kept going with that. But then I started another series about a guy here in Austin. This was more inspired by Robert B. Parker and that kind of stuff, where I liked that. I mean, they're serious mysteries, but they're, he's a smart aleck. He's, always cracking jokes and stuff. So I created this guy named Roy Ballard, who is actually a legal videographer, which they do a lot of different things. But what he specializes is, where you got a guy following someone around with a camera trying to prove they are committing insurance fraud because they pick up an 80-pound bag of concrete or something. That's what Roy does. But it always kind of evolves into something bigger and more complicated than what he thought. So, and that's set in Austin here. And so I've just been, for the last few years, just been alternating between the two series. Just one book, back and forth for 5-6 years now. So the latest is, Free Ride in Blanco County, and I'm working on Roy Ballard #7 right now. So that's in a nutshell what they are.
Thank you. And Terry, do you want to tell us a little bit about your series?
Sure. I had always wanted to be a mystery writer, and I wrote several books that never were very successful. So finally, I went to a conference, and someone said, "Oh, you have to dig down deep into your heart and really pick out something that you you can write that no one else can write." And my grandparents lived in the town of Somerville, Texas, which is right in the middle of the state. It's a small town, and I started thinking about that. I had always loved that town because it's full of mosquitoes. The water tastes terrible. The air smells awful from the creosote from the Thai plant, and it's really hot and humid. So what's not to love, right? I used to love it. And I thought, I know that place really well, and that's where I'd like to set it. And I decided to not use that town to make a fictional town of it, and that's Jarrett Creek. And I decided that I wanted to use an older protagonist because I was tired of reading a private eye novel where the private eye knocks on the door and a little old lady comes to the door, and she's got a little pink fluffy stuff on and she can barely move and she must be at least 60. And I said, wait a minute, that's young. And so I decided to make an older protagonist. In the first few books, he's an ex-chief of police, and people still call him chief because they really trust him. But then in the third book, which is called Dead Broke in Jarrett Creek goes broke, and they can't afford a chief of police anymore. So he comes in and says, "I will do it. I don't really need a salary." So he starts being the chief of police. And in all the other books, 8 books in all, he is the chief of police. And I just finished the 9th one, just finished working on it, and hope to have it out sometime in the next year. And it's set every other year in the real Somerville. There is a motorcycle rally. And I decided I'd like to set a story in the motorcycle rally, and it has been so much fun. It's really crazy. I've gotten to know a lot about motorcycles, which I never knew anything about. And I know I'll get a lot of emails from people saying, "Wait a minute, you got that wrong. That's not the right kind of motorcycle." So I'm being a little vague with some of those, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a good book. All of the books feature a lot of the same characters, and one of the main characters is called Loretta Singletary, and I think of her as the Greek chorus. She gossips, but she's not mean. She likes to know everything in town. So if Samuel, wants to know a little something that's a little, that he doesn't know anything about in town, he will ask Loretta, and she'll be able to fish it out because she's a member of the Baptist Ladies Circle, and they all know everything. So that's always fun. And then there's another character that came in I think the 5th novel. And I made up an idea that the state of Texas decided to put minority cops in small towns to get them to know a little bit. And this is Maria Trevino. And Maria is named after a friend of mine in high school named Mary Trevino. And sadly, Mary, I found out, died just before this book came out that was going to be her, you know, to let her know that she was remembered. Anyway, so Maria has become a very favorite character of a lot of people. She's a stoic sort of a person who likes to go by. She likes to toe the line, and Samuel doesn't like to toe the line as much. And so they have some little set-tos about that. So anyway, that's my series.
Thank you. And Reavis, you want to tell us about your 2 series?
Yes, ma'am. My first series is the Red River series that is set in Lamar County up on the Red River, Northeast Texas. Back in the first novel, The Rock Hole, originated in 1964. And it is about, it's based on my granddad, who was a constable at that time in Lamar County. He was also a farmer. So he would be on a tractor during the day, raising crops and feeding cows in the morning and the evenings. And then he would, in the evenings, he would clean up and put on a shirt instead of his overalls and a pair of slacks, put on a badge, and then he was a local law. He just across the river from the little town that I use as the basis for this novel. The little town is called Chakotah, Texas. But I changed it to Center Springs, which was the original name of that town. And it is right across the river from all the beer joints and honky tonks in Oklahoma. So anything that happens up in Oklahoma usually drifts south. It's about midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning, and that's when Granddad really went to work and handled all that. But the first novel, The Rock Hole, came out in 2011. Kirkus Reviews said it was one of the top 12 mysteries of 2011, and I was really pleased with it. I was excited to get that kind of recognition. And it features it features a kind of an ensemble cast. You see the world through the eyes of Ned Parker and his wife Miss Becky, and they're the folks that back when I was a kid I thought were elderly, and I am now my granddad's age, so they weren't that old at the time. But Ned Parker deals with the local issues, and in Rock Hole he has to wind up dealing with a budding serial killer, something that most people didn't know about at that time. Serial killers weren't in the news or in popular fiction or anything, and so that's the basis of the Rock Hole. And then the second set of eyes you see the world through comes from a young man who just got back from Vietnam right when he was starting in 1964, and his name is Cody, and he's a relative of the Parkers, and so you see the world through his jaded eyes as he gets back. And then finally, you see everything that's going on through the eyes of a set of 10-year-old cousins, boy and a girl, who always wind up in the middle of everything. But then you get their innocence. It bleeds over into the manuscript, the book, and there's a lot of humor in there from that point of view. So you see, throughout the Red River series, you get that view in every book. There are 8 books right now in the series. The 8th is coming out in January, and it's called Laying Bones. And so we follow that ensemble cast each year. That was a mistake that I made. I didn't think this was going to go as far as it did. Every book is the next year. So 64 and 1965 was Burroughs, and so we see the kids age, we see the world change throughout these books. What I didn't realize is all of a sudden now I'm getting really close to 1970, and the 70s were terrible. So I'm gonna go back now, I think, and insert books between those existing volumes. Now, my second series from Kinsey, the Red Rivers are from Poison Pen Press, and they are an imprint of Source Books. My second series features Texas Ranger Sonny Hawk, and it's contemporary. They're called contemporary westerns, and Sonny Hawk is a Texas Ranger down on the Rio Grande. Lives in a renamed town, which is a combination of Marfa and Alpine, Texas, out in the Big Bend region. And the first book in that is Hawk's Prey. And again, I try to vary the vision through different sets of eyes so that you see what other people might see in such a situation. I've been very fortunate. 2 of my Sonny Hawk books have won the Spur Award from the Western Writers Association, and that was a shock to me. The most recent is Hawk's Fury. Now the one behind me, Hawk's Target. That's the most recent that won the Spur, and Hawk's Fury is going in for submission for the next contest. But those are my two series. They rock and roll. There's not very much downtime. When you pick one up, you need to have time to sit down and get a cup of coffee and take the ride, because it's going to be fun.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you for that. I was going to let our participants know I have a few questions to ask our authors, but please start asking questions of your own either through the chat or through the Q&A, and I will field those to our authors. So I had one question for all of our authors, and you can just go around again. And you went into a little about this, but I just kind of wanted to see if you could go into more detail on how you go about creating or coming up with your main characters, like the protagonists or some of the other characters in your series. You want to expand upon that, Ben?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you go back to 1998, this was when I was reading a lot of Hyacinth and Leonard and Janet Ivanovich, and was getting inspired to try to write a book. But I was like, what am I going to write about? And, you know, I'd always read, before these funny folks, I'd read all the, you know, thrillers and suspense and some pretty dark stuff. But it's like, okay, if I'm going to make it nice and light, what kind of cop is this going to be? I mean, there's got to be, or what kind of investigator, whether it's a cop or not. And I've been a hunter for most of my life, so I thought, why not a game warden? I mean, I know that in some of the smaller counties where the sheriff's office might be a little stretched thin, sometimes the wardens will get involved and help them out with various things. So that's how I decided on the game warden, was just because I thought it would be interesting. I knew something about him. I'd been arrested. I mean, sorry. That's a joke. No, actually, I hadn't been around wardens much at all, but so I was lucky that I had a friend that was a biologist with the Parks and Wildlife Department. He set me up with a game warden to just go with a ride along and just ask him questions and, you know, look at his, what does he carry on his belt? What does the inside of his truck look like? What kind of weapon do they carry? All those little details. And his name, well, there's been several wardens that have helped me, but Jim Lindeman he became a real good friend of mine. I still bother him with questions every time I'm writing one of these Blanco novels, but so he helps me fill in those details. But then, okay, next it was, well, where's it going to take place? You know, setting. We had bought a little tract of land out in Blanco County in about 1995. I love it out there. It's just, you know, just west of here, 35 minutes. So I thought, why not Blanco County? Because the whole population is like 10,000 people. And that would be the kind of area where the sheriff or some of the smaller police departments might involve a warden. In fact, a warden just yesterday got in a just epic chase through Llano County, and I think the guy rammed him. Did anybody hear about that?
Wow.
Yeah, I think the guy rammed the game warden's truck. If anybody knows anything about that, type it in. But I just saw a thread on this thing called Hill Country Scanner, which is, you know, like they report law enforcement and you know, medical and that kind of thing. But so then I had my game warden, John Marlin. I had my setting, Blanco County, and then I just needed a plot, you know, without going on too long. I was sitting in my deer blind. I was going to start the book in January as a New Year's resolution. And I heard this story on the news. I was listening on my radio about drug mules bringing drugs into the country by filling condoms with heroin and swallowing them, and then getting on a plane and flying into town or flying into the country. So I thought to myself, I don't want to give away too much, but couldn't you do something similar with a white-tailed deer, you know? And that's as far as I'll go. But it kind of grew from there. I had this idea. Of course, these are comedy mysteries. You got to suspend disbelief on some of this stuff a little bit. But so I had my setting, my plot loosely, and then, you know, just started filling in characters. Marlon has a best buddy named Phil, just like I do. The sheriff, he's known the sheriff for a long time because they're both from Blanco County. So you start filling in, you know, I got my rednecks, Red and Billy Dawn, and it's just fun I like returning to the same characters and having them come out every second, third, fourth book. But I also like bringing in new people. There's always somebody coming into Blanco County and causing problems. You know, some outsider that kind of makes their way in. So that's kind of how I went about it.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Terry?
You know, I was really fond of my grandfather, and one time when I was a child, I remember somebody came into the yard. He raised cattle, and somebody came into the yard and he said, you know, Mr. Sam, there's a problem. I did some work for somebody and they won't pay me. And he said, and my grandfather said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. So I asked my mother afterwards, why did they come to Papa about that? And she said, because he used to be the mayor of town and they still trust him. Everyone trusts him to be the person. And I said, he's the guy I want to be my protagonist. And then I thought, he was the mayor, but I didn't think it would be very interesting to have the mayor of a town be the crime solver, because I'm not really into amateur detectives. And I thought, well, what if he was a previous chief of police and he was, he still got involved with things. And then, like I said, in the third novel, I decided to make him the chief again, because I really wanted to have a real police procedural about it. But that meant that in the first two books, I could make him fast and loose with the way things worked. And then by the third time, I had to really find out how policing worked in small towns in Texas. And as it turns out, the Highway Patrol is actually in charge of that. But I talked to a police officer in a town of 55,000 close to Austin and Bastrop. And he said, supposedly it's the Texas Rangers. Supposedly it's the Highway Patrol that's in charge of these, but in fact, it's mostly the Texas Rangers who do it. So he said, because they have unlimited access to things. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. So I used that in some, and I have one of Samuel's friends became a guy that he had known for many years who was a ranger. And so he actually talks to him about some of the cases. And like I said, I have these other characters. I have a lot of relatives, and my relatives show up in tiny little sneaky ways. But the interesting thing, at least people tell me this is the interesting thing, is almost every one of the books is based in some reality. It's about some story that actually happened in this small town, or that, some story that one of my relatives told me that they knew about, or something that I read that really happened. And I think that the one that was the most interesting of those was in the sixth book, which was a prequel. It was when Samuel was the chief of police when he was really young. And it's called An Unsettling Crime for Samuel Craddock. And it is a crime that's has some racial overtones to it. And it was based on something that actually happened in this small town, but it happened in the 90s. And I decided to move it back a little bit so I could really give it more of a thing about police brutality and racial problems. And it got a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and they also wrote an article, and it was featured in the article because they said it was a book that was really pertinent about police brutality and corruption. So that was really a wonderful book to write. And when I started writing it, I decided to go back and look up the actual case, and to make sure that I didn't make it too close to the reality of it. And I found that just about 6 months earlier, Texas Monthly had done a whole spread on it, because the man who had been convicted of it and had spent 18 years in prison had just been exonerated by the Innocence Project, and that was all racially motivated too. And they actually eventually found the actual people who did the crime. So I just found that fascinating, and it really made it much richer for me to write this book. So all the others, I must say that the one that I'm writing now, the one that is set at the motorcycle rally, really is not in, there's nothing about it that I know of that's true. So although all the others are. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Terry. And Reavis?
Yeah, as I said earlier.
Anyone else lose audio? Sorry.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. Can you turn on your, there we go.
Okay. Well, I don't know what happened.
I don't either.
Anyway, the Rock Hole and the Red River series were based on my granddad, who was a constable. And so I took some things that I heard from him that he didn't talk too much about what he did. I would hear about him pulling over drunks or taking people to jail for various things. But the first book came about because of a case that he was working on, and I never heard the resolution for it when I was a kid. I heard about what was going on. There was someone mutilating animals in the river bottoms north of Paris, Texas. And Granddad was working on that, trying to figure out what was going on. But he had no idea. He didn't have any experience in those kinds of things. And so he eventually, we all grew up. I didn't hear anything else about it. And I was talking to him one day, a couple of years before he died. He was retired, and we were sitting on the front porch of his little farmhouse, watching his cows. That was a big excitement for him, was watching his cows out in the pasture. And we were just visiting, and I remembered that crime he was investigating. I asked him, I said, "Did you ever catch the guy that was doing that?" And Granddad's kind of looked at me and kind of looked over at his cows again, and he said, "Well, son, some folks just need killing." And that's all he said about that. And with that statement, that's where the rock hole was born, because I did not have any idea what happened. He never talked about it again to me. And so the kids are a reflection of myself and my cousin. The black deputy sheriff in this town is based on a black deputy sheriff that I knew when I was a kid that worked with my granddad. So they all came about as part of my history. Now, beyond that, the rest of the books, I don't plan a thing. I sit down. I even plan how to start a book. I sit down and put my fingertips on the keyboard, and it unrolls in my head as if one of Terry or Ben or someone else is writing it. It just comes up on my screen. So I don't plan good guys. I don't plan bad guys. I don't plan situations. I just follow what has developed in my subconscious at some point, and that's how I work. And it also came about when I wrote the Hawks Fury, the Sunny Hawks series. My agent said she wanted me to try writing some thrillers. I didn't want to write a typical thriller, so of course I'm fourth generation Texan. I'm going to set it in Texas and down the Big Bend region to start out with. And I had to think just a little bit about the character in there. I wanted a Texas Ranger. I wanted him to be of a certain age. And once that character solidified in my mind, everything else fell into place. I don't plot. I don't plan. I wrote an outline for a book once with characters and everything else. I abandoned it after the second page of the manuscript because it just didn't fit into my head. And so that's how I work. Just recently during the pandemic, we've all been locked up. Some writers can write, some can't because of this. But my mind is always going. It's always burning, and I constantly. And at night, my wife wakes me up because I'm fighting, yelling, dealing with issues that come up, and so she wakes me up at least once a week, I think, just to get me back into the world. And I had a dream at early June that was so vivid and so clear that I got up about 4 o'clock and sat down here at the computer and started writing my dream, and it flowed so quickly and so well and so developed that I finished that manuscript in 6 weeks. And that's unheard of for me, 90,000 words in 6 weeks. And my agent, I sent it to my agent, and she was stunned because she wasn't expecting it. She goes, "This is brilliant. Where did it come from?" I said, "I dreamed it." And she wouldn't believe me. She thought I'd been working on it for a long time. So, that's how it works in up in here. Whatever's in here flows out, and the characters are fully developed, as are the situations and the protagonist and antagonists.
Karen, can I hop in here?
Of course.
Reavis, this is so interesting because the first 2 books I wrote in the Samuel Craddock series, I actually was on a boat, and I got up every morning at 6 o'clock and wrote, and they poured out of me the same way you're talking about. And it actually, from beginning to end, took me 2 months with each of those books. They wrote themselves.
That happened to me on my second book in the Red River series, Burroughs. I finished The Rock Hole, but now they want a series. And so they said, "Well, what's your second book going to be about?" And I have no idea, but I've been having a recurring dream for decades about tunnels underneath a house and through a house. And so I sat down and wrote Burroughs, which is based on that dream. And there's this huge building in Lamar County. It's a cotton exchange. And hoarders, these guys that are hoarders to the max, have packed it solid with garbage with tunnels through the building.
Yeah.
And my two of my characters, John Washington and Cody Parker, enter the building because someone's been killed, tripping a booby trap going inside there. And so that entire manuscript poured out of me. And I think it's one of my better ones, but at the same time, I had no idea where it was going to go. And the funny thing about that is, once I finished the novel, I have not had that dream since. So it kind of cleansed what was going on in here, or satisfied something I didn't know about. But yeah, I know writers. A friend of mine is Jeffrey Deaver. Jeffrey outlines to
Yes.
I mean, I talk to him every week, and he tells me about the detail. His outline is 140 pages long. I don't know how he does it, but I make his head explode. When I wrote that other novel and gave it to my agent, I was telling him about it, and he said I couldn't even imagine trying to write like that. He said this doesn't work.
Isn't that interesting how different writers work? Yeah.
It is.
This is fascinating. Thank you. And I have one more question, and it leads into a question we've received from one of the attendees. So I was talking with the authors before we went to broadcast about how I've been trying to get a Texas Mystery Panel going for about 4 years now, and it never really has worked out because there's been one author that didn't write Texas. Just some reason it didn't work out. And it took a pandemic, but I finally have 3 authors that are a full panel that they all write Texas mysteries. So my question is more about Texas and the landscape. And each of you set your mysteries in a different part of Texas. How does the landscape influence your stories? Does it play a big or a small part in your mysteries? And we can just go around again.
Well, I'll stick with the Blanco mysteries here, and absolutely, I mean, the landscape does, with having a game warden as my main character here in Central Texas. I mean, we've got deer, like you wouldn't imagine. We've got wild pigs, we've got dove, we've got, just all kinds of, and there's fishing, there's plenty of rivers. If, a warden is involved in water rescues and water safety. If you watch any of the Lone Star Lost show, you see just, all the different things they do. But right here in Central Texas, we've got all that. And a lot of places do, but it's like the perfect scenario, the perfect setting for a game warden. And, sorry, you dinged. So yeah, I mean, it definitely does play a role. And I just love describing the, Caliche Hills and the real rolling oak covered hills and rivers, and it's definitely a character in the book. The setting is.
I wish I could say that I set out to do that, but people are always telling me how they feel like they're right there when they read my books in the setting, and I never think about it. It just seems like it's just there, and it's in my bones and in my blood, and it just comes out in the writing. I have to say there's some particular things, those snakes, there's always a snake somewhere in the books because the snakes are everywhere there. I mean, I remember my poor mother was terrified of snakes, and she couldn't get us to take it seriously. I'd say, yeah, snake. So, but I've never been bitten by a snake, so I don't know. But like I said, it's hot and humid, and there's almost always a rainstorm going on in one of my books, or the clouds coming up in the skies. It's more like about weather than about the actual land itself. Although, I've got a scene in which I'm talking about the clay in the soil, and how slick it is. The second it starts raining, everybody's slipping and sliding, and clay tends to get really awful when it rains, and then it dries up instantly, so that you've always got drought and either too much or too little water. So yeah, that does tend to be part of it.
The landscape actually becomes a character in my books because it plays such an important role in what's going on. Every book talks about in the Red River series talks about the river bottoms and what it's like to be a farmer, and as Ben said, you have all these tributaries with trees growing on them, and then you have a field somewhere that's a cotton field or corn field or alfalfa field. And so in Texas is sprawling. Most people, if you're not from Texas, you don't understand how far apart everything is. And so that geography also plays a part. If somebody asks me how far is Ben's house from mine, I couldn't tell you in miles, but I can say about 3.5 hours. That's how we judge things. But when we were younger, we judged them by six packs. How many six packs does it take to get from point A to point B? So the geography is huge, and it is a character unto itself. At the same time, like Terry said, weather is also a character. I always have some kind of, because we have such a varied environment here. We always have storms or tornadoes, or it's cold, or we have a blue norther coming in. So weather is always a character in my books too. In fact, I'm writing one right now. It's a prequel to the Red River series. It takes place in 1931 in the oil fields of East Texas. And during research, I found out that the Dust Bowl drought hadn't reached that area by 1931. That came later. And so I have just this constant rain and mire in East Texas around these oil rigs. And then again, there's the landscape. Like Terry said, it's muddy, it's mucky. Back then it was wagons and Model A's and T models, Tin Lizzies, and the roads were seldom paved, so all that's churned up into just this mire and muck that these people are having to deal with. At the same time, people are drilling for oil, and other people are shooting each other. So it's there are a lot of characters in a book that you don't realize are characters.
Thank you. And then the question we received that kind of fits in with that: do you think your characters or stories could have been set in another state?
Well, I would like to say that mine are just so unique that it's absolutely possible. But I mean, obviously, you could create a game warden or a conservation officer. I mean, there are other series in other states with game wardens, and when it comes to the characters, like one thing I keep going back to Red and Billy Dawn because they have somehow turned out to be like the fan favorite. But the thing I always hear in emails, in person, whatever, is I know those guys, and so we've got guys like that in Louisiana, California, Oklahoma, everywhere. There's people like that. And so, I mean, I would guess that if I had grown up in Ohio and I wanted to write a series like this, I probably could. Now, there'd be differences, obviously. There wouldn't be, I don't think there's Caliche in Ohio. Maybe there is. But yeah, I mean, there would be small differences, but hopefully they would be just as fun. But of course, I'm born and raised here. I wouldn't want to set it anywhere else. If they said, well, write something set in North Dakota or somewhere, I don't know a lot about North Dakota. I would have to do a lot of research. Nobody wants to do research. Although occasionally I'll have somebody go on a road trip and I just use Google Maps, and you'll go, oh look, there's a Dairy Queen over there, so you can name all these landmarks. Oh, they drove through town. Oh, they stopped at the Walgreens right at the corner, whatever. So that's very handy. But beyond that, I've just written from my experience and that kind of deal. But yeah, I think they could be set in other regions, definitely in Texas, but also I think around the nation.
Well, I never would have thought of that, except that I get fan mail from people all the time saying, this could be my town, and it's in Pennsylvania or it's in Iowa.
Right.
So I think it's a small town sort of thing. But I also think that even though it's small town stuff, I think it could be, the things I write could happen in cities just as easily, because I have found that in cities, people tend to congregate in little clumps, so that it's a small town within a city. It's not the same at all, but I think a lot of things can happen just anywhere. I don't know that my characters could be exactly the same, because I have guys that are they're tote guns, and that's not going to be happening everywhere. And I have people who are belligerent about certain things. I have very religious people, and people who are it feels to me like it's authentic to this small Texas town, but apparently it's small towns in a lot of places. I have to say, one of my favorite reviews I ever got, I hardly ever read my reviews, but I read this one, and it said, "I just loved this novel. It's so wonderful, and the descriptions of Oregon are spot on." I said, I'm not exactly sure what this was supposed to be.
Yeah, my work is so uniquely Texas, it wouldn't work anywhere else. I mean, I incorporate the language that we have here. There are 5 geographical regions in the state of Texas, and people speak differently in those regions.
Yep.
People in East Texas are completely different than folks out in West Texas in the way their phraseology is, or the way they refer to things. I mean, East Texas, I'd say, we got a pretty hard rain last night. Out in West Texas, Big Bend, they'd say, well, we got some moisture. That's the things that they do. And I use a lot of old stuff that came from my grandparents, ways of talking. I mean, if you're trying to pull out on a road in your car and you say there's a lot of cars and you can't get out, I'd say, well, it looks like they let the gate down to me. Well, that's an old phrase where they'd let the gate down, the cows would get out, and you couldn't get across. So I'm pretty uniquely Texas, and I think that's why it works so well. It's because it's about this state. All 3 of us, we're pure Texan, and I think it comes out of everything that we write.
Well, I have found that sometimes I have trouble with editors, because editors will say, "Oh, I never heard this before," and I say, "Well, you're hearing it now because it's real."
I've had copy editors. I had water standing, and they were driving down the country road past fields, and water was standing in the middles. And they said, "You left a word out." "In the middle of what?" I said, "No, I didn't. It's the middles. That's the middle between the rows." They just, if you're not from the country, you don't understand, or from Texas, you don't understand some of the things we say, and we have to clarify that.
Yeah.
I want to throw one in here. This one from a book that I have, like my little place out in Blanco. A guy from, where was he from? I think he's from Michigan. He was coming out to see me, and this is 20 years ago. I had drawn a map because I wasn't on a phone or anything. Well, I keep saying the word caliche. If you don't know what that is, it's like limestone gravel, But anyway, he was late, and I didn't have a phone. He was like an hour late. He finally shows up, and he had been looking for a sign that said Caliche Road. He thought it was an actual named road.
There you go.
Sorry, man. I didn't think you would do that. So.
Well, and the other thing is too that I write about what I know. I have a good friend, great author. He writes books about Texas, and they're bestsellers. But he's only been to Texas 2 times.
Oh
so
my.
Everything comes from Google Maps or his imagination, and it causes some problems sometimes. Some of his stuff, I love him, but he just makes my head explode. Talking about a Comanche reservation here in the state. No, there's no Comanche reservation anywhere. So there's certain things that you have to know about your region if you're going to write about it.
You guys know the word stob?
Oh, I stuck my toe on a stob not too long ago.
Exactly. Well, it's not in the dictionary.
No.
And I put it in one of my books, and I had to explain it because nobody knew what it was.
My Texas Ranger drives a Dodge 3500 dually. And I had to explain to the copy editor what a dually was, the truck with 4 back tires. And they were so bumfuzzled from that. They thought that all the tires were in line. So there were 2 lined up in the back in addition to the front 2. And I had to say, no, my truck has big hips. Yeah. And they just don't get, I could do an hour on some copy editor questions that they just don't understand how we speak down here.
And another question from Annie Jacobs to all the panelists. With being pantsers, how do y'all handle deadlines?
I'm not sure what she means by panthers, but I'll ask it. I'll answer.
Pantsers, I think, like PANTSERS, or you're not.
You write by the seat of your pants instead of out.
Yeah, I do that. Well, the good news is I don't have any deadlines. I mean, I've been doing this for about 20 years, and for the first 10, I went the traditional route. I was with St. Martin's. For the first 6 books, I had 1 book with TCU Press, but then I kind of branched off and went out on my own. And the only deadlines I have are self-imposed, like my 3,000. Well, it's more of a quota than a deadline, but like I have a a daily quota, a weekly quota. I just try to be real methodical about how I go about it. But I could just take 3 weeks. I mean, I don't have any deadlines. It's so great. My mom is also an author, and we very often just, talk about how liberating it is. I mean, I had great experiences with St. Martin's, but when I went out on my own, that's when I really was able to make a lot of progress. I do have editors, of course. I have a circle of friends that are professional writers, some other authors that I send it to about 5 different people, and they give me input, and I shape the book based on that, and then I produce the file, and then I have about 5 different proofreaders. So if anything, I mean, the books are probably tighter than well, as tight as St. Martin's or any other book you find on the shelf behind you. But I mean, I try to get a book out about every 8 to 9 months, and beyond that. And again, though, if I miss it, I'm not letting anybody in New York or anywhere else down. There is nobody waiting on it. It's just me. And about a month before I think I'm going to be done, I will email my editors and say, it's about a month out. Are you going to be able to help me out again? And I'm so lucky to have this great. I mean, I came from the ad business as a writer, so I knew some writers from that world. And in fact, my old boss is like one of my top editors, a huge influence on me, and she's been there on every book, even the ones with St. Martin's. I would send out to them. But other than trying to get a book out every 9 months and hitting 3,000 words a week, 3,000 polished words a week, I have no deadlines, and it's great.
Do your fans ever get pushy though, and want to have you write faster?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd say pushy, but they're enthusiastic, and I mean, all the time. I mean, I can be having a thread on Facebook about something completely unrelated. I go, "When's the next boy book? When's the next?" No,
Exactly.
I'm cranking. The last couple of weeks, I was going back through my current manuscript and just tightening some things up. And I thought, man, am I being lazy, or am I really letting this percolate and try to come up with this ending I really needed? And I felt like I was being lazy. And then I finally nailed the ending, and I was like, oh, I have it. And it's that great feeling. I know you've had it, everybody here. And I know if I pushed it that last week or the week before, I wouldn't have hit that same ending. So it's like that percolating. I mean, to me, the plotting takes up more of my time and effort than just the writing. If I have a scene and I know what this scene is going to be, I can write 1,000 words in a couple hours. But usually it's like, no, I'm spending more time going, where is this going next?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it going there? That kind of deal. And just figuring out the twists and the turns. And I mostly do what Reavis does, which is I might have an idea. Okay, I don't want to throw out my latest idea. I was about to throw out my idea. Well, let's say somebody's out hunting and they find a bone, a leg bone in the woods or something. I mean, that might be enough right there. Just have some hunter out there and he finds a femur, and that might be as developed as my idea will be. And somehow that came from the question about deadlines. But next.
I've never had any trouble with deadlines. I start writing and I bang it out until it's done, and then I go over it. And I have an agent, and she's a martinet where that's concerned. She wants it to be on time. So actually I think I had one book that I had to ask for an extension, but just for a couple of weeks, and they were fine with it. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I usually I know when my deadline is, and so I average about 1,000 words. I try to average 1,000 words a day on every manuscript. But at the beginning of this pandemic, I was working on 4 manuscripts at one time, and so I'm just bouncing back on whichever one got a hold of me. And so none of them had a deadline, which was great, and I just worked on them until I got one took off, and then it goes. As long as you write every day, or try to write every day, and try to reach your word goal, you're gonna meet the deadlines, and that's not that hard. And I've been averaging 2 books a year for the last 4 or 5 years, and 4 years at least. And so it's not an issue. I just need to get the time to sit down to write.
Yeah, Well, I'm with Ben. There have been a couple of times when I just sort of wasn't sure where things were going, and you just have to plow through. You just have to keep working on it. You just let the words flow, and it may not be what you think it should be, and you may not be where you think it's going to go, but eventually you're going to get there.
And we've had a couple of more questions come through. One of them is a great question from Josephine Curtis. She says, I'm from England. Is there an English text and dictionary for all those terms the authors are mentioning?
No.
No, not that I'm aware of, but I do have some old some words on my website, so she can go over there and
What a great idea.
and I'm adding. I need to add some more of those. I put stuff out that needs to be explained, just like a dually. So I'll be adding to it from time to time. But the words are on my website.
Yeah, I don't know one. So.
And from Nan, there's a book years ago, Donald Westlake and Joe Gore's swapped. I can't read that word. Harassers.
She added at the end. She said that she meant characters.
Characters. Okay.
Each guy took the other guy's character.
If you had a chance to do that, with whom would you share? Well, that's an interesting question.
Man, that would take some thought, but I mean, obviously, I would want to go for some huge bestseller. So, but no, I think I like more. Again, I would want it to be somebody that writes fun, comical type fiction, like Hyacinth. Probably Carl Hyacinth. I mean, he writes so much fun stuff. But Lawrence Shames also writes some great. I love his characters a lot, and his dialogue and his characters are probably a little more like mine, although Hyacinth has some wacky stuff. And then Elmore Leonard, wish he was still around. But yeah, actually, I think it would be Elmore Leonard. I'm waffling, but that's a great question. I would love to swap characters with Robert B. Parker. There you go. So that's 4.
James Louis Burke for me.
Nice.
So.
Swapping characters, a lot of I read a lot. There are a lot of writers that I could throw out there, but I can't say who I'm working with. But I am working on a novel with 2 other authors right now, and 2 other best-selling novels that many of you know. And we each take a chapter, and we'll write a chapter and then submit it, and then the next person I will pick up and continue on with the story. We have no plot. We don't know where it's going. It's already gotten off the rails, but you're seeing, if this book ever sees publication, you will see 3 completely different styles of writing that seem to me to blend very well together. So that's something unique. I think that may wind up getting out there. We just hope it's going to.
Well, that's great. We'll have to stay tuned. I don't know why I'm getting feedback. And another writing question from Annie Jacobs. Do all of you edit while writing or edit completed?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that earlier. I absolutely do. I mean, if you're not a writer, you probably don't realize 3,000 words a week is not a whole lot. There's people who hit that in a day. Now, I know a lot of people that shoot for like 1,500, maybe 2,000, or 1,000 is very common. The 3,000 a week is not a bunch. So, but when I'm done, I'm nearly done. I mean, because I'm polishing and making sure everything is fitting together the way I want, and there's not going to be like, okay, I'm going to delete this character when I get to the end because there's not going to be massive changes to be made, and that's because I'm tightening it up as I go. And I'm not talking about like copy editing. I'm talking about the big picture stuff, plot. Making sure there's no loose ends or where is this going the way I want it to go? That whole thing. So. Yeah, I edit while I work for sure.
I don't. I write 2,000 words a day when I'm doing a first draft. I just slam it out there. I don't pay in too much attention, but if I'm really stuck, what I may do is I may choose a scene or something that went back, or I may go back to the beginning and just sort of start combing through and doing a little editing just to kind of get myself back into where I was at the beginning. And I'll do that along the way. And a lot of times it's very helpful to do that because then it moves me forward a little bit. And that's just if I'm really stuck, though. If I'm rolling along, I don't pay any attention to it. I just let it pour out.
I shoot, as I said, I shoot for about 1,000-word per day goal. Sometimes it's a lot more, and sometimes it's less. But each day, at the end of the day, I put it away. The next morning, when I come back to it, I sit down, I read what I wrote the day before, edit that, tighten it up, and then that's a launching pad for the next day's writing.
I'm going to try that. Sounds like a good plan.
It has worked well for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have come to just about the end of our hour, and it's been fascinating. I want to thank all of our writers for spending an hour of their afternoon with us. This has been really fascinating, and I appreciate it. And you're joining us from all parts of the U.S. And I wanted to mention that on the books again, if you want to order the books, please order by tonight if possible, because I'm going to try to turn in a book order to our vendors tomorrow morning. And the featured books are available on our Boerne Book Festival website. But if you don't see one on there, please reach out to me and I will try my best to get it. Also, if you would like a copy of the program, I will trim it up and send that out to whomever wants it. So thank you to our authors. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Can I throw something out real quick, Karen?
Of course.
The Rock Hole, my first novel, is being re-released, and it will drop on Tuesday, this Tuesday, with a new cover and an introduction by my friend Joe R. Lansdale from Nacogdoches, Texas. So if anybody would like the first book in this new series, it's re-released. This is it with a new cover.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Looks great.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought it up. I meant to, and I forgot, so I apologize.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. You guys have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Down the road.